The greatest thing that led to the creation of NASA was the fact that Russia beat them into space. Russia put the world's first satellite, Sputnik, into orbit in October 1957. America couldn't be left behind, and NASA found itself in a very, very few years tasked with this enormous job of going to the moon before the Russians. They sent up chimpanzees, for instance, like Ham the chimpanzee here. America was very relieved to get their first man up in a tiny little capsule called the Mercury. And their first man, their first astronaut, was called Alan Shepard. But he was riding a very little rocket, a very underpowered rocket, and he couldn't go all the way around the world. He could only go for a 15-minute, what they call a suborbital hop. Things got into their stride more for America when they sent John Glenn into a full orbit. The fascinating thing about the first spacewalks, both the Russians and the Americans, is that they didn't put any handholds on, and they didn't put any footholds either. So the astronauts would slither around and not be able to sort of get hold of anything, to clamber back inside their spaceships. Apollo 11 set off for the moon in July 1969. We think that all these missions were routine and everything like that, but in fact they were fantastically dangerous because they were really being extremely rushed. NASA insiders were certainly frightened Russia might beat them and humiliate America yet again. It was one of the Apollo astronauts, Bill Anders. He summed up all of Apollo. We thought the mission was to go and study the moon, but what we actually discovered was the Earth. It was the view of the Earth looking back, seen through human eyes, which was probably the most important thing that Apollo gave to us. It was certainly a great spur to the environmental movement. When the Russian economy and communist political system collapsed in 1989, America thought to itself, let's try and employ as many Russian rocket engineers on a peaceful project so that they don't go off and work for countries that we're not so sure about. And so these people who had used to have been rivals in the moon race were now allies, and together they began building what we now call the International Space Station.